Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Kat's Writing and Reading Nook. So this week, I am not writing for this video. And you're thinking, now what on earth could you possibly do in a writing vlog besides write? Little backstory. I published a short story that I wrote last week on my blog on Saturday, and I promised that I would give y'all both the written version and the audio version as read by me. Unfortunately, my blog would not let me put the audio into the post, so I just posted the the short story by itself. So today I'm gonna read to y'all. Just a treat. And to keep that promise, because we do that around here as much as we possibly can. So, without further ado, here is my fantasy/adventure short story called The Rescue of a Horde. Allure stared at the remains of his horde with no eggs in sight. He tucked his wings to his side and crept into the cave, his heart squeezing in his chest. Gold dust littered the rocky ground, but his eyes quickly went to the ruined, empty, rocky nest in the corner. Where are my children? He scrambled to where the 3 eggs should have been. As Allure scoured the nest itself and the area around it, a glint to his right caught his eye. The dragon bent his head downward, nudging aside a few loose stones. A growl ripped from his throat as he knocked the polished knife to the side. "They led those adventurers right here!" he shrieked. No wonder the villagers he had arranged to meet had never showed. Allure scrambled out of the cave, slamming his tail into the entrance on the way out. Leaping into the air, the great dragon flapped his wings, beating the air as he shot towards the village. He would burn it down if it came to that. He would retrieve his eggs. Below, some of the village children cheered and waved. Allure's heart clenched. Would his own hatchlings be well? With that in mind, he sailed over the village, heading for the clearing on the other side. Upon reaching the ring of trees, Allure hit the ground with a resounding thud, scattering birds from the treetops. In the midst of the squawking, one of the village elders strode from one of the houses near the clearing. "Allure," she called, smiling as she came. "What brings—" She paused, staring up at Allure's bared fangs and arched wings. "Who is responsible for the destruction of my horde?" Allure bellowed, sparks shooting from his mouth. Everyone scrambled back. A few shrieked and raced for their homes. "Bring them out!" "Great dragon, I... The elder trailed off. Oh no. Allure studied her for a moment, then forced his own fire to cool. "What?" "I told you they were up to no good," Marjorie, the village baker, yelled. She ran up to Allure. 2 days ago, a group of adventurers showed up, asking about a dragon horde. We dismissed them and thought that was the end of it. She frowned. Rigel, Duffy, and Farlow, though, they seemed interested. We warned them, but by this morning they were gone. Allure growled. "Where did they go?" "Hail, folk of the forest!" Everyone whirled around except for Allure, who narrowed his eyes at the newcomers. 2 dwarves, a human, and a selkie strode down the road towards the villagers and dragon. "Wait!" the elder began. "You!" Allure roared, his breath sparking as he rose on his hind legs. "You dare return after the wrong you dealt me and mine?" The party froze, hands reaching for weapons as Allure moved forward. "Peace!" the selkie yelled, dropping her sealskin beside her. Walking towards Allure with her teammates attempting to drag her back, she continued, "We just arrived in this area and have taken nothing." Allure seethed, but the elder explained that this was not the same group of adventurers who had wrecked his horde. "Wait," one of the dwarves said. "Do you need help getting it back?" Allure glared at him, but the dragon tilted his head to the side. "You would help me?" Of course we would. The name's Dragnar. The black-headed dwarf pointed to each of his companions in turn. This is my brother Rutherford, the humans Ophelia and the Selkies Paralia. Where do we need to start? Allure, and we're not sure where to start. His eyes still narrowed, he lowered his head. What do you expect to receive in return? The party looked at one another. A share of the gold, Dragnar said. We need to pay off a debt. Allure took a deep breath, closing his eyes. He opened them after a moment. If it returns my hatchlings to me, you may have a quarter of what we recover. They took your kids? Ophelia shrieked. You should have led with that. She drew 2 knives from her belt and pointed skyward. Let's go. Allure knelt, allowing the party onto his back to cover more ground. His riders hung on tight, yelping as he took off into the sky. They flew for a few miles until Allure tired. The sun glinted off his scales as he descended toward the nearby mountains. Look! The mountain's on fire! Paralia shouted. Allure scanned the area until his eyes landed on the thick black smoke rising from behind a summit to their right. Allure, Dragnar called. Do your mountains normally do this? The dragon opened his mouth to reply, then paused. Faint screeching carried over the rocks from the direction of the fire. No! Gathering his remaining strength, Allure beat his wings. His breath came in great heaving pants as the mountain flew by beneath him. No one said a word as they coasted onto the side of the mountain, landing with a scrabbling of stones. Smoke blew in everyone's faces as the party dismounted. Screams and screeches sounded from the rubble as the building crumbled. Allure dashed forward as the party followed, shouting instructions at one another. The dragon, ignoring them, reached the structure and roared. Answering screeches came from his left. Closing his eyes, Allure drove his face into the flaming wreckage. Something clawed onto his snout and he opened wide. 2 little bodies scrambled inside, almost going down his throat in their haste. Allure pulled back and gently dropped them on the ground behind him. Paralia was by them in an instant. They coughed and sputtered, but seemed all right. Allure, are those it? Rutherford yelled, scrambling toward the fire with a bucket. One more, Allure cried. A muted whine came from somewhere in the inferno. The dragon's heart clenched. Here, Ophelia called. She waved from across the wreckage, throwing more water onto the flames. Allure ran around the blaze and repeated his earlier maneuver. Where was it? He nosed the wreckage, panic rising as no wiggling body came to meet him. Suddenly, just as he was going up for breath, a squeak. He risked a peek and saw the little soot-covered hatchling. Allure snatched it up and dragged the tiny body from the flames. Cheers erupted, only to cut short as Allure laid the little one on the ground. The hatchling gasped, its head shaking as she lifted it toward Allure. Tears filled the great dragon's eyes. My children hatched, he thought as the other 2 scrambled to their sibling's side, and no one could put out the flames. Paralia and Dragnar, however, jumped into action. The Selkie pried open the tiny soot-covered jaws. Dragnar pulled a green lump from his belt and shoved it down the hatchling's throat. For a moment he held her jaw closed, stroking her throat. The little dragon choked and coughed as Ophelia cast a damp blanket onto the hatchling's back. No one spoke. Then the hatchling coughed out a now black lump and let out a screeching wail. Allure quickly nudged all 3 little ones together and wrapped around them. Dragnar and his group busied themselves outside the scaly circle as the great dragon watched his hatchlings. Allure, Rutherford called. The dragon in question raised his head. Most of the gold fused together in the fire. Do you have any ideas on how we're getting it back? Allure narrowed his eyes for a moment. I could fly it, but I cannot hold everyone and everything at once, he replied. Dragnar laughed as he lugged a large lump of gold out of the wreckage. Why would you need to? I cannot leave my hatchlings. The black-haired dwarf nodded. What if you took them, 2 or 3 of us, plus some of the gold in one trip and then came back for the rest. He jerked a thumb at the burned-out rubble behind him. I mean, looks like whoever took everything didn't get the chance to enjoy their spoils. Not sure if we need to bury anyone. For a moment, Allure said nothing. A reasonable solution, but I left them once. Ophelia walked from the wreckage and stood in front of Allure, her eyes boring into his. Let anyone try to take them again. I, for one, would be glad to teach the fools a lesson. She brandished her knives in emphasis. Allure glanced around at the rest of the party. They all nodded. The dragon took a deep breath, nearly choking on it when one of the hatchlings let out a squeal. Allure smiled down at him, then nodded. They will not be alone. That is the end. I absolutely had to write something with a feral dad dragon. That just, it had to happen. It had to involve a dragon. I've had Mandalorians on the brain for weeks, I think. So that did not help. Or maybe it did, because parents going feral over their kids. I love that. But anyway, if you want to read the story yourself, I am putting the link to the blog post in the description below. And I will be writing more of these in the future. I don't know how often. I'm shooting for once a month because I'm getting back into school and I have work and things are expensive. You guys know all this. But I really enjoyed Readsy's competition format, which includes 5 prompts that are all related to a central theme. You choose a prompt, maybe more if you want. Make a story out of that, and then you enter it in their contest on their website. I've also been looking at some other contests that look interesting, including one with twisted fairy tales, which I love fairy tales. Okay, that's how the Project Wyvern series even came to be. It's because I love fairy tales. I love dragons and all the assorted flavors that they come in, and librarians and all of that. But at the heart of it all, fairy tales. But all that to say, I will be posting more of my shorter writing on my blog, as well as some opinion pieces that I'm working on at the moment, because I'm sorry, but if a defense needs to be made, specifically about fan fiction and other topics. So, I will be seeing y'all on Friday for our book review on Orphan Train. I have opinions on that book. Some of them good, some of them... All right, I will see y'all on Friday. Happy writing, everybody.